The chant started low, that way a tide starts before anyone decides to call it a tide. One voice at the rope line, then four, then a dozen, then the whole sidewalk outside the Meridian Room, picking up a single name and throwing it against the brick until the brick threw it back. Marcus. 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 The man they were calling for stood 3 feet from the door with a record crate balanced on his hip and a key card in his hand that no longer worked, and he did not move toward the entrance, and he did not move away. He just stood there in the cold with his name washing over him from 400 strangers, while the man who owned the building pressed his back against the locked gate and refused to turn the bolt. What broke that lock open was not a fist and not a lawyer. It was a single sheet of paper that had been folded in a coat pocket for 9 weeks. Keep that paper in mind. We will get to it. First, we have to go back, because a moment like that does not happen by accident. And the only way to understand why a crowd would freeze a city block over a man with a milk crate of vinyl is to understand who taught him to carry. Let me take you back 11 years. Marcus Beaumont was 19 the summer his grandmother stopped being able to climb the stairs to her own apartment. She lived above a shuttered record store on Callaway Street, 3 flights up, and for 40 years she had run the sound at a club called the Blue Iris that no longer existed except in the way she talked about it. Her name was Eunice. She had been the first woman in the city to hold a union card as a sound engineer, and she had earned it in rooms that did not want her there, behind boards that men twice her size could not balance the way she could. She used to say the board was a conversation, not a control panel. You did not push the room. You listened to what the room was already trying to say, and then you helped it say the thing louder. When her knees gave out, Marcus moved in. He told his mother it was temporary. It lasted 6 years. Eunice could not climb stairs, but she could still hear everything. She heard a refrigerator compressor going bad 2 rooms away. She heard the difference between rain that would pass and rain that would settle in. And she heard the thing in her grandson that the rest of the family had decided was laziness. Marcus had dropped out of his second semester at the community college. He worked nights stocking a grocery warehouse, and he slept until 2 in the afternoon, and his mother called him a waste of a good mind. And Eunice listened to all of it from her chair by the window and said nothing for a long time. Then one night she handed him a milk crate. It was an ordinary crate, the kind that gets stolen from behind every corner store in America, and inside it were 11 records, not a collection, a lesson. She had chosen each one. She told him to listen to the first one all the way through without doing anything else. No phone, no talking, and to come tell her in the morning what the bass player was doing in the 3rd minute that he was not doing in the first. He thought it was a joke. He did it anyway, because she had asked, and because she was the only person in his life who spoke to him like he was already the man he might become, instead of the boy he currently was. In the morning, he told her the bass player had started leaving spaces. Holes. Places where the note should have been and was not. Eunice smiled the smile she saved for the rare correct answer and said, "That is the whole thing right there. Anybody can fill a room with sound. The art is knowing what to leave out. The art is the silence you build on purpose so the people have somewhere to put their own feeling." That was the first lesson. There were 1,000 more. She taught him on that milk crate the way other grandmothers teach a child to cook, by feel and by failure, and by making him do it again. The apartment had 2 turntables she had carried up those 3 flights herself in 1979, a mixer with a cracked housing she had repaired with electrical tape and refused to replace, and a pair of headphones with one ear held on by a rubber band. She made him learn beat matching by ear before she would let him touch anything with. She would put a record on each table, set the tempos slightly off on purpose, and cover the pitch sliders with her hand, and she would say, "Fix it," and she would not tell him whether the second one was running fast or slow. He had to hear it. The first week he got it wrong every single time. He wanted to quit. She told him quitting was a thing people could afford who had other doors, and he did not have other doors, so he might as well learn this one all the way down to the hinges. She made him learn the names of the people who built the music he loved, the engineers and the session players nobody clapped for, the ones whose hands were all over the records and whose names were nowhere on the sleeve. She would hold up a record and ask who played the drums on it, and if he said he did not know, she would not tell him. She would make him go to the library on Calloway and find out, and come back, and only then would she play him the next one. She told him a person who only knows the famous name on the front of the record does not actually know the music. He knows the marketing. She said the marketing is the lie they sell you about who matters and who does not, and the music is the truth about who actually did the work. And a man who cannot tell the difference between the two will spend his whole life clapping for the wrong people. He filled half a composition notebook with names that summer. Drummers, bass players, the woman who had engineered a record he loved, and whose name appeared nowhere except in a single line of a magazine he found in the library's bound. Archives, a woman who had run a board in 1971 the way Eunice had, in a room that did not want her, and who had then disappeared from the history of the things she built. Marcus wrote her name down too. Eunice looked at the page and tapped that one name with one finger and did not say anything for a while, and then she said, "That is what they do to us. They let us build the room, and then they write somebody else's name on the door, and the only thing you can do about it is refuse to forget. So you keep the list, you hear me? You keep the list your whole life." By the time Marcus was 23, he could walk into any room with that crate, and the people would not leave until the lights came up. He was not famous. He did not want to be famous, exactly. He wanted what Eunice had wanted, which was the board, the room, the conversation. He played weddings and warehouse parties and the back rooms of restaurants on the nights the restaurant was technically closed. He saved his money in a coffee can because he did not trust banks. And he wrote down every set he ever played in a composition notebook with a black and white marbled cover, the date and the room and what worked and what died, because Eunice had told him that a man who does not study his own failures is doomed to keep paying for them. She died in the spring of his 25th year, in the chair by the window with the radio on. He did not play for 3 months. The crate sat by the door. Then one night he opened it, and underneath the 11 records he found a 12th, one he had never seen, a pressing so old the label had worn nearly blank, and tucked inside the sleeve a note in her shaking hand. It said only this: "Language is the one thing nobody can repossess. Not the landlord, not the boss, not anybody. Music is a language. You already speak it better than they will ever admit. Now go find the room that needs you." He found the room 2 years later. The trouble was, the room was owned by a man named Dale Prentice. Let me paint the full picture for you, because the building matters. The Meridian Room sat on the corner of Calloway and 8th, 4 blocks from the apartment where Eunice had died, in a part of the city that had spent 30 years being called dangerous, and was now being called up and coming by the same newspapers. It had been a furniture warehouse, then a church, then nothing, and then a developer named Dale Prentice bought the shell for very little money and poured a great deal of borrowed money into turning it into the kind of club that gets written about. Exposed brick, a sound system that cost more than the building, a rooftop, a guest list, a velvet rope and a man at the rope whose entire job was deciding who was the right kind of person to let past it. Dale Prentice was 44, and he had a particular theory about his own club, which was that its value lived in its exclusivity, and that exclusivity was a thing you protected by keeping the wrong people out. He did not say what he meant by the wrong people. He never had to. He had a way of looking at a person and pricing them in under a second, and a way of being warm to the people he priced high and invisible to the people he priced low, and he had built an entire business on the accuracy of that one cruel instinct. He needed a resident DJ. The club had opened loud and stayed empty. The crowds came for one weekend and did not come back, and Prentice could not understand it. Because he had bought the most expensive sound system in the city and hired a series of DJs with large followings on the internet, and still the room felt like what it was, which was a beautiful box with no conversation happening inside it. His floor manager was a woman named Renata Cho, who had worked clubs for 20 years before this one, and who had stopped expecting owners to listen to her. She was the one who had heard about Marcus. She had been at a warehouse party in February, freezing, half regretting the night, and a man she did not know had set up a crate of records in the corner and slowly, without ever once asking for the crowd's attention, turned 300 strangers into one organism that moved together until 4 in the morning. She had watched him do it with no laptop, no lights, no name anybody knew. She had watched him leave the spaces, the holes, the places where the bass should have been and was not, where the whole room held its breath and then exhaled together when the note finally landed. She had gone home and written his name on her hand so she would not forget it. It took her 2 months to convince Prentice to let Marcus audition, and she only won the argument by framing it as a cost saving, because Marcus would work for a fraction of what the internet DJs charged. Prentice agreed without ever meeting him. He told Renata to handle it. He told her he did not care who stood behind the board as long as the room filled, and he said it the way a man says a thing he is going to forget, he said. The audition was on a Tuesday, the dead night, with the club nearly empty. Marcus came in through the service door with the crate on his hip, and he set up in 20 minutes without speaking much. He did not plug in a laptop because there was no laptop. He set the 2 turntables level with a folded matchbook under one corner, the way Eunice had shown him, and he wiped the needles with a cloth he kept in his coat pocket, and he laid the crate flat and ran one thumb across the spines the way another man might count money. Then he played for the 40 people scattered round the room as if they were 4,000. He did the thing Eunice had taught him. He listened to what the room was already trying to say. There were 2 women near the bar who had clearly come to talk, not to dance, and instead of fighting them, he built a low, warm bed of sound underneath their conversation that made them lean closer to each other, and after a while they were not talking anymore, they were moving, and they did not notice the moment it had happened, which was the entire point. There was a bartender who had worked the room since it opened and had stopped hearing the music months ago, the way you stop hearing a refrigerator, and 40 minutes in Marcus caught him with a rag stopped halfway across a glass, just standing there, listening, the glass forgotten in his hand. There was a man by the door in a delivery uniform who had only come in to use the bathroom and stayed 2 hours. By midnight the 40 people were 100, because the 100 outside had felt something through the walls and come to find the source of it. By 1 the room was full, and nobody in it could have told you the name of the record that had filled it, only that they did not want to leave. Renata stood by the soundboard with her arms crossed and her eyes wet, and did not say a word because she did not need to. The room was saying it. Prentice was not there. He saw the numbers the next morning, the bar receipts, the door count on a Tuesday, and he told Renata to sign the man to a residencies, Friday and Saturday nights. He still had not met him. He signed off on a contract he did not read closely, drafted by Renata, and one clause in that contract is going to matter enormously later. So hold on to the fact that Renata Cho wrote it and Dale Prentice did not read it. For 9 weeks the Meridian Room was the place. Lines down Callaway by 10, the rooftop full, the kind of word of mouth that money cannot buy, and Prentice had been trying to buy for a year. He did not understand why it was working. He assumed it was the room. He assumed it was him. He would walk the floor on a Saturday in a good suit and accept compliments about his beautiful club, and never once climb the 4 steps to the booth, where the actual reason was standing behind a crate of records, leaving spaces, because Dale Prentice had still, after 9 weeks, never actually looked at the man he was paying. That is the part you have to sit with. For 9 weeks the most important person in his building was a stranger to him, because he had decided in advance that the important people came in the front in good shoes, and the help came in the back, and he had never updated the theory. Here is the night it broke. It was a Saturday in October, the 9th Saturday, and it was the biggest night the club had ever had, because a magazine had run a small piece that week calling the Meridian Room the best new night in the city, and crediting in the last line an unnamed resident DJ whose sets people were starting to follow from room to room. Prentice had read the piece. He had been annoyed by the last line. He had told Renata that the club did not need the mystique of an anonymous DJ, that the club was the draw, and that going forward he wanted the booth lower in the marketing and the room higher. Renata had said nothing, which Prentice took for agreement. It was not agreement. It was a woman who had learned that owners do not hear words, they only hear receipts. Marcus arrived at 9, the way he always did, through the service door, except that night the service door was blocked. The club had hired extra security for the crowd, and the new man on the service door was a contractor who did not know the staff, and he looked at Marcus, at the crate, at the second-hand coat and the work boots, and he made the calculation that Dale Prentice had built his entire business on. He decided Marcus was the wrong kind of person, and he told him deliveries went around the far side, and he did not move. Marcus said calmly that he was not a delivery. He said he was the DJ. He said it the way Eunice had taught him to say true things without heat, because heat is what people use when they are not sure. The security contractor laughed. It was not a cruel laugh, particularly. It was worse than cruel. It was certain. He looked at the man with the milk crate of old records, and he was completely, comfortably certain that this could not be the DJ whose name was in the magazine, because the DJ in the magazine filled a 400-person room on a Saturday, and the man in front of him was carrying his music in a crate that said property of a dairy that had gone out of business in 1991. He told Marcus to wait while he checked. Then he stepped inside and locked the service gate behind him, and did not come back for a long time. What happened inside is this. The contractor found Dale Prentice near the bar and described the situation. A man at the service door claiming to be the DJ, didn't look right, no laptop, just a crate of old records. And Prentice, who had still never seen Marcus, who had spent 9 weeks accepting credit for a sound he had never bothered to trace to its source, did the thing that was always going to happen eventually. He went to the front of his beautiful club, to the main entrance, where the line ran down Callaway, and the velvet rope held back 400 people who had come specifically for the man Prentice, was about to turn away, and he found Marcus standing there in the cold, because the contractor had told him to come around to the front, and Prentice looked at him for the first time, and he priced him in a second, and he got it wrong. You have to understand the geometry of the moment, because the geometry is the cruelty. Marcus was on the sidewalk, on the public side of the rope, with the crowd. Prentice was inside the gate, on the owner's side, in his good suit. Between them was a low iron gate that Prentice had ordered installed because it looked exclusive, and Prentice, in front of the line, in front of the magazine crowd, in front of the people holding phones, told the man who was the entire reason any of them were there, that the staff entrance was around back and that paying customers used the front and that he should not hold up the line. Marcus said quietly that he was the resident DJ. Prentice said, and people heard it, people recorded it, that the resident DJ was a professional who did not show up, looking like he had come to read the gas meter, and that if Marcus did not move along, he would have him removed. Then he turned his back and told the gate to stay shut. Now, this is the moment. This is the one we started with. 40 seconds of one man's certainty about another man's worth, performed in front of the exact crowd that had come to prove him wrong. And here is what Marcus did, because what he did is the whole story. He did not argue, he did not raise his voice, he did not pull out his phone to prove who he was, though he could have. He had been raised by a woman who taught him that you never let the room see you fight for a thing that is already yours, because fighting for it concedes that it might not be. He set the crate down on the cold pavement, carefully, the way you set down something that matters. He put one hand flat on top of the records, and he waited. He waited because Eunice had taught him the last lesson, the one she did not say out loud, the one he only understood now. The art is knowing what to leave out. The art is the silence you build on purpose, so the people have somewhere to put their own feeling. He left a silence, and the crowd filled it. It started with a woman near the front who had been at the warehouse party in February. The same night Renata had been there, who had followed this man's sets across 4 rooms in a year, and knew exactly who was standing on the wrong side of that gate. She said his name, just once, not loud, Marcus. The man next to her had also been at 3 of those rooms, and he said it too. And the thing about a name is that it travels faster than an argument, because an argument asks people to choose, and a name only asks them to remember. Marcus, Marcus. By the time it reached the back of the line, it was not 4 people, it was 40. And by the time the people who could not see the gate understood what was happening, it was not 40, it was the whole block. 400 voices throwing one name against the brick of a building that a man had bought to keep the wrong people out. Except the wrong people were all on the inside, and the right one was on the street with his hand on a crate of records. And the wall between them was a decorative iron gate and a single locked bolt. Dale Prentice stood with his back to that gate and felt the sound of it through the metal. Renata Cho came out of the building at a run. Here is where the paper comes in. Remember the paper? 9 weeks folded in a coat pocket. Renata had written Marcus's contract, and she had written one clause into it that Prentice had not read, because Prentice did not read things written by the help. It was a simple clause, and it was the kind of thing a woman writes when she has spent 20 years watching owners take credit for other people's work. The clause said that the resident DJ, and not the venue, held the rights to the recorded sets performed at the Meridian Room, and that the venue's license to use the resident DJ's name, likeness, and recorded performances in any promotion was contingent on the resident DJ's continued good standing as an employee, terminable by the DJ at will, with all promotional rights reverting immediately upon any denial of access to the premises, in plain language. The magazine piece, the waiting list, the brand. The mystique Prentice had been annoyed by and had wanted lower in the marketing. All of it ran on a name and a sound that belonged, legally and completely, to the man he had just locked outside his own gate. And the second he denied that man access, every dollar of it walked back out the door and onto the sidewalk, where it was currently chanting. Renata had that contract in her hand. She had grabbed it off the office wall on her way out. She did not hand it to Prentice, though, and this is the part that matters, because the rules of this kind of story are strict about who is allowed to save whom. She did not save Marcus. She walked past Prentice without a word, and she went to the gate on the inside, and she stood there, and she looked through the iron at the man with his hand on the crate, and she did the only thing an ally is allowed to do. She removed the barrier she controlled. She took out her own key, the floor manager's key, and she set it in the lock of the gate Prentice had ordered shut, and she looked at Prentice, and she said one sentence loud enough for the front of the line to hear it. "You want to explain to 400 people why you are locking out the only reason they came?" Prentice did not answer. He looked at the crowd. He looked at the phones. He did the math a man like him always does last, when it is too late to do it gracefully, and he understood in the space about 4 seconds that he had built a business on a single instinct, and that the instinct had finally, in front of witnesses, been wrong about the one thing it could not afford to be wrong about. He told Renata to open the gate. She did not move. She held his eye and she said, "Not me, you." And so Dale Prentice, in his good suit, in front of the line, in front of the magazine crowd, in front of the phones, walked to the gate he had ordered installed, and he turned the bolt with his own hand. And he opened it, and the chant did not stop. It changed. It rose, because a crowd knows the difference between a door that opens and a door that is forced open, and they had just watched the second kind. Marcus picked up his crate. He did not gloat. He did not say anything to Prentice at all. He walked through the open gate the way he walked into every room, like a man arriving at a conversation he intended to have, and he climbed the 4 steps to the booth that Prentice had never once climbed, and he set the crate down, and he played. And here is the thing nobody who was outside that night ever forgot. He did not open loud. He could have. The crowd was at a fever. The moment wanted a hammer, and any other man would have dropped the biggest record in the crate and let the room explode and made the night about the explosion. Marcus did the opposite. He started almost silent. He started with one of the records from the original crate, the 11, the lesson, a slow thing with the bass player leaving holes, and he made 400 people who had just been screaming go completely quiet. And then he built the silence into something they could stand inside. And only when the whole room was leaning in together did he let the note land. The room came up like a tide. Renata cried by the board the way she had at the audition, and this time she let it show. because the long-deferred thing she had been carrying for 20 years, the watching of owners take and take, had finally tipped the other way, and a person is allowed to weep when a debt that old gets paid. Let me tell you what happened to the building, because the building is how this kind of story keeps its promises. Within a week, the magazine ran a second piece, and this one had the name in the first line, not the last, and the name was Marcus Montant, and the piece described, because a dozen people had filmed it, exactly what had happened at the gate. Prentice tried to control the story. He could not. The footage was already everywhere, and the footage was not ambiguous, and the worst part for Prentice was that he did not even look like a villain. In it, he looked like something smaller. He looked like a man who had no idea who was standing in front of him, which is the one thing a man who prices people for a living cannot survive looking like. The crowds did not punish Prentice by leaving. They punished him by staying, and by making it completely clear who they had come for. They lined up for Marcus. They wore his name. The room that Prentice had built to be about himself became, permanently and in front of him, about the man he had tried to leave on the sidewalk. The reversal of the geography was the thing. The booth, the 4 steps up that Prentice had never climbed, became the only address in the building that mattered, and Prentice found himself in the position of a man who owns the walls of a church, but not the faith inside it. He still held the lease. He held nothing else. The license to use Marcus's name and sound, the engine of the entire brand, had reverted to Marcus the instant Prentice denied him the gate, exactly as Renata's clause said it would, and so for the club to survive, Prentice had to do the thing his whole life had been built to avoid. He had to negotiate with the help. From a position of need. The deal they reached was not vengeance. Marcus did not want the building, and he did not want Prentice ruined, because Eunice had also taught him that the desire to destroy the people who underestimated you is just another way of letting them keep deciding your weather. What Marcus wanted was the room, the conversation, the board. He got the booth on a permanent contract, with the rights to his name held entirely by him. He got approval over who else played the room. He used that approval the first week to book a 70-year-old man who had run sound at a club downtown for decades and had been quietly let go when the club was sold, a man whose name Marcus had in his notebook from years back, and he paid him what the internet DJs used to make, and he stood at the back and watched him work and learned 3 things he had not known. He got Renata named talent director, which moved her, after 20 years, into the office on the 2nd floor with the window, the office that had been Prentice's. The first thing she did in that office was take down the framed magazine pieces about the club that had Prentice's name in them and the buildings, name in them and nobody else's, and she put up instead a corkboard, and on the corkboard she began to pin the names of every person who actually built a night in that room, the openers, the sound techs, the woman who tuned the system, a list, the kind of list Eunice would have kept, because Prentice agreed in the negotiation to move his own operations to a smaller room in the back, the room with no window, near the service entrance, near the gate. He spends his nights now in the room near the gate, doing the accounting for a club that is famous for a man he tried to turn away. He is not destroyed. He is something more exact than destroyed. He is invisible in his own building, in precisely the way he once made other people invisible, and the symmetry of it is not loud. It does not need to be, it just sits there in the floor plan like a sentence somebody finally finished. There is one more thing. Marcus took the money the room made, and he did something with it that had nothing to do with the room. 4 blocks away on Calloway Street, the shuttered record store under the apartment where Eunice had died was still empty, still boarded, still for lease at a price the neighborhood could not pay. Marcus bought it. He did not turn it into a club. He turned it into what his grandmother had needed and never had, which was a place where a kid with a good ear and no money and a family that called him lazy could come in off the street and put on a pair of headphones and learn from people who knew the names that are nowhere on the sleeve. There were 2 turntables on every table and a wall of records a kid could pull from for free, and an old man behind the counter on some afternoons who had run sound downtown for decades and who would cover the pitch sliders with his hand and say, "Fix it," and not tell you whether the second one was running fast or slow. The first kid who walked in off the street was 12, sent by nobody, drawn in by the sound through the door, and he stood in the middle of the room, not knowing he was allowed to touch anything, and Marcus handed him a pair of headphones with one ear held on by a rubber band, and told him to listen to the first record all the way through and come back in the morning and tell him what the bass player was doing in the third minute that he was not doing in the first. He called it the Blue Iris, after the club where Eunice had run the sound for 40 years in rooms that did not want her there. On the wall by the door, at eye level, he mounted the milk crate, the original one. The 11 records and the 12th with the worn blank label, and her note inside the sleeve in her shaking hand. You will not find his name on the front of the building. He did not put it there. He put hers. Here is what I want you to take from this, and then I will let you go. The biggest mistake is never being underestimated. Everybody gets underestimated. It is going to happen to you in a doorway somewhere, by someone who has priced you in a second and gotten it wrong, and you will not be able to stop them from doing it. The mistake is believing them. The mistake is standing on the public side of some decorative little gate and deciding that because a man with a key has looked through you, you must actually be invisible. You are not invisible, you are mistranslated. Those are very different things. The difference is the entire distance between the sidewalk and the booth. Marcus did not break that gate down. He did not have to. He just set his crate on the ground and put his hand on the thing that was his, and let the silence do what his grandmother had taught him silence does. He left a space, and the people who knew his name filled it. So I will ask you the thing this story asks. Somewhere in your life, there is a room that needs you and does not know it yet, and there is probably a gate, and there is probably a man at it who has gotten you wrong. When you find yourself standing in that cold, do not spend your strength trying to convince the man with the key. Set down the thing that is yours, put your hand on it, and trust that the room can hear you through the wall. If this story moved something in you, sit with whose name you would chant if you saw them locked out in the cold, and whether you have ever been the one inside the gate. That is a harder question than it looks. Stay with it a while.